Tonight's story is a quiet journey through history, made for you to simply listen to as you drift off to sleep. Megalodon is well known as the largest shark ever to have lived, a giant predator whose enormous fossil teeth have been discovered around the world. But tonight, we'll take a deeper look at its story. First, turn the volume down a little. Then simply lie back, close your eyes, and make yourself comfortable. There is no need to follow every word. Just let the story drift quietly in the background, and if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly fine. And now, let tonight's story slowly begin. Long before the first cities were built, long before the first farms appeared, and long before human beings walked along the shores of the world's oceans, there was another world beneath the waves. It was a world that would have looked familiar in some ways. There were coastlines, there were warm tropical seas, there were fish moving through shallow water, turtles swimming through the open ocean, and marine mammals rising toward the surface to breathe. And yet, this ancient ocean was not the ocean we know today. The continents were still changing. Sea levels rose and fell. Ocean currents shifted. Entire groups of marine animals appeared, spread across the world, and disappeared again. And through millions of years of this changing world, one enormous shark became one of the most remarkable predators ever to inhabit the sea. Today, we call it Megalodon. Its scientific name is generally given as Otodus megalodon. The word megalodon comes from ancient Greek words meaning, quite simply, large tooth. It is an unusually appropriate name, because although the animal itself disappeared millions of years ago, its teeth remained. Some are small enough to fit easily into a hand, others are enormous. The largest known examples approach 18 centimeters, or around 7 inches in height. For an animal whose skeleton was mostly made of cartilage, these teeth became its great message to the future. They survived when most of the shark did not. They settled into ancient sediments. They became fossils. And, millions of years later, people began finding them. Today, those teeth appear in museums, private collections, scientific laboratories, riverbeds, cliffs, beaches, and sediments that were once part of ancient seas. They've been discovered across much of the world, from the eastern coast of North America to parts of Europe, Africa, Australia, Asia, and South America. The fossil record tells us that Megalodon was not confined to one small corner of the planet. It was a widely distributed ocean predator. For millions of years, it inhabited seas around the world. And perhaps the strangest thing about this enormous animal is that almost everything we know about it has had to be reconstructed from incomplete evidence. There is no perfectly preserved megalodon lying inside a block of stone. There is no complete skeleton showing us exactly how long its head was, exactly how broad its body became, or precisely what shape its fins took. The shark vanished. Its softer tissues vanished with it. Even most of its skeleton disappeared. And so the story of Megalodon is not simply the story of a giant shark. It is also the story of how science rebuilds a lost world from fragments. A tooth, a vertebra, a mark on a whalebone, a geological layer, a concentration of small teeth in an ancient shallow sea. Each fragment adds another detail, And slowly, over centuries of study, an image begins to form. Not a perfect image, not a final image, but one that becomes clearer as new evidence is discovered. The Megalodon we imagine today is therefore different from the Megalodon imagined a century ago, and it may be different again in the future. That uncertainty is part of what makes the animal so fascinating. For now, imagine an ocean millions of years before our own time. Sunlight reaches down through warm surface water. Schools of fish move through the sea. Marine mammals travel between feeding areas. Young whales remain near their mothers. Somewhere farther away, beyond the immediate field of view, a very large animal is moving through the water. There is no dramatic music, no sudden attack, no human observer. Only an ancient shark doing what animals have always done: moving, feeding, growing, reproducing, and surviving for as long as its world allowed. Megalodon would continue doing this not for a few centuries or a few thousand years, but across an enormous span of geological time. The species appears in the fossil story around 23 million years ago, although estimates concerning its earliest appearance have varied as scientists study older fossils and the lineage that produced it. Its story continued through much of the Miocene epoch and into the Pliocene. That means Megalodon existed for millions upon millions of years. To put that in perspective, the entire history of our own species is only a tiny fraction of that time. Homo sapiens appeared hundreds of thousands of years ago. Megalodon had already disappeared millions of years before that. No human being ever stood on a beach and watched a living megalodon swim past. No ancient sailor encountered one. No prehistoric hunter saw one from a canoe. The worlds of humans and megalodon simply did not overlap. Yet today, few extinct ocean animals are more famous. And that fame began with something that people had been finding for a very long time. Large, triangular stones that looked strangely like teeth. Long before anyone understood that these objects had belonged to an extinct giant shark, people wondered what they were. Large fossil shark teeth had been discovered by human beings for centuries, and probably much longer. In some cultures, they became useful objects. In others, they became ornaments or ceremonial items. In Europe, fossil shark teeth were sometimes known as tongue stones. Their triangular shapes suggested petrified tongues, and stories grew around them. At different times, people attributed unusual or even supernatural properties to these mysterious objects. This was understandable. Imagine finding a tooth larger than any shark tooth you had ever seen, perhaps in a place far from the modern sea. Without geology, without paleontology, and without an understanding of deep time, how would you explain it? The idea that oceans had once covered land that was now dry was not yet part of ordinary scientific understanding. The idea that species could completely disappear from Earth was itself difficult for many people to accept. A strange stone found in a hillside might therefore receive an explanation based on folklore rather than biology. Gradually, however, naturalists began comparing these stones with the teeth of living sharks. In the 17th century, the relationship became increasingly difficult to ignore. The Danish naturalist Niels Steensen, better known by the Latinized name Nicholas Steno, became an important figure in this story. After examining the head of a large shark in the 17th century, Steno recognized the strong resemblance between living shark teeth and the mysterious fossil objects people had been collecting. This helped strengthen the argument that so-called tongue stones were not stones shaped like teeth. They were teeth. Actual remains of animals that had once lived. It was a deceptively simple realization, but it had enormous implications. If a shark tooth could be buried inside rock far from the modern sea, then the history of the Earth must be far more complicated than it appeared at first glance. Land could once have been underwater. Sediments could accumulate. Those sediments could harden. They could later be raised above sea level, and traces of ancient life could remain inside them. In this way, fossil shark teeth became part of a much larger scientific transformation. They were evidence not only of vanished animals, but of a changing planet. More than a century later, as the science of fossils became increasingly organized, the giant shark received a scientific name. The Swiss naturalist Louis Agassiz studied fossil fishes extensively during the 19th century. In the 1830s, he used the name Megalodon in connection with the enormous teeth. The meaning large tooth captured the most obvious feature of the fossils perfectly. But scientists did not immediately agree on exactly where this animal belonged in the shark family tree. For many years, Megalodon was often placed close to the modern great white shark. This was not unreasonable. Both had large triangular teeth with serrated edges. Both were large marine predators. And because teeth were the main fossils available, those similarities carried great weight. Eventually, however, researchers began recognizing that similar teeth do not necessarily mean two animals are especially close relatives. Different species facing similar ecological challenges can sometimes evolve similar structures. Today, Megalodon is generally placed in an extinct group called the Otodontids. Its current scientific name is Otodus megalodon. The great white shark belongs to a different lineage. They are both members of the broader group of sharks known as lamniforms. But the old image of Megalodon as simply an enormous direct relative or ancestor of the great white is no longer considered an accurate description. This change in classification also changed the way artists and scientists tried to reconstruct the animal. For much of the 20th century, the easiest way to picture Megalodon was to take a great white shark and enlarge it. A familiar animal became a convenient template for an unfamiliar one. If a great white looked one way at 6 meters long, perhaps a megalodon looked roughly the same way at 15 or 18 meters. But nature does not always scale so neatly. A body that works efficiently at one size may not work exactly the same way at another. As researchers examined the biomechanics of very large sharks, fossil vertebrae, tooth proportions, and comparisons among living species, questions began to appear. Perhaps Megalodon was not simply a giant great white. Perhaps its body was more elongated. Perhaps its proportions were different. Perhaps its head and fins had shapes better suited to moving an enormous body efficiently through the water. Modern reconstructions, therefore, remain cautious. Scientists know that Megalodon was huge. They know a great deal about its teeth. They know something about its vertebrae. They know where it lived. They know what kinds of animals it consumed. but its exact external appearance remains uncertain. Even the familiar image of the animal is still being revised. And so, if you picture Megalodon now, it may be best not to imagine a single exact form. Imagine instead a broad outline, a giant lemniform shark, a streamlined marine predator, a powerful tail moving from side to side, large pectoral fins helping control an enormous body, gill slits along the sides of the head, row of large serrated teeth, and a body whose precise proportions are still being debated. There is something peaceful about that uncertainty. The animal has been gone for millions of years. We can approach it only through evidence, and every fossil offers only part of the story. Perhaps, somewhere in rock that has not yet been examined, another important piece is still waiting. The reason the Megalodon fossil record is dominated by teeth begins with a basic fact about sharks. Unlike mammals, reptiles, and many other vertebrates, sharks do not have skeletons made primarily of hard bone. Their skeletons are composed mostly of cartilage. Cartilage is strong and flexible. You can feel a form of it in your own nose or ears. For a living shark, this lightweight skeleton works extremely well. But for a paleontologist millions of years later, it creates a problem. Cartilage generally does not preserve as easily as bone. After an animal dies, much of it breaks down. Under special conditions, parts of a shark skeleton can fossilize. Megalodon vertebrae have been found, and some are remarkably large, but they are far less common than the teeth. Teeth are different. They contain highly mineralized tissues. They are hard. They survive. And sharks produce a great many of them. A shark does not receive one permanent set of adult teeth and keep it for life. New teeth continuously develop behind the active rows. Older teeth are lost. Replacement teeth move forward. Over a long lifetime, a shark may shed thousands upon thousands of teeth. Megalodon almost certainly followed the same basic pattern. Some estimates suggest that an individual could have produced tens of thousands of teeth during its lifetime. Imagine this occurring not in one animal, but across populations spread through much of the world's warm oceans. Generation after generation, for millions of years. Teeth continually falling to the sea floor. Most disappeared. Some were broken. Some dissolved. Some were buried under sediment. And a small fraction entered the fossil record. This helps explain why Megalodon teeth can still be found in many places today. Some occur in sediments now exposed on land. The shoreline has changed since the Miocene. The continents themselves have changed. Places that were once sea floor may now lie well above water. Rivers cut through old marine deposits and release fossils. Waves erode cliffs and expose them. Divers search sediments offshore. People walking along beaches sometimes discover the triangular outline of an ancient tooth among stones and shells. For a moment, an object lost millions of years ago becomes something that can be held in a human hand. The tooth itself tells a story. Its broad shape helped resist the enormous forces involved in feeding on large prey. its edges were serrated, its root anchored it into the jaw. Different teeth occupied different positions around the mouth, and their shapes varied accordingly. A large megalodon probably carried hundreds of teeth in its jaws at one time. Estimates often suggest around 276. Behind the visible teeth waited replacements. This was not a smile in the human sense. It was a biological system constantly renewing the tools the shark depended upon for feeding. And it is because this system produced so many teeth that paleontologists have enough material to study patterns across time and geography. The size of a tooth can offer clues about the size of the shark that carried it. The chemical composition of fossil material can offer clues about diet and environment. The location of teeth can reveal where adults or young animals lived. Even damage to the tooth can sometimes tell a story. Some megalodon teeth show marks that appear to have been produced by other megalodon teeth. Exactly how these marks formed is uncertain. Perhaps they resulted from feeding around the same carcass. Perhaps they reflect interactions between individuals. Modern sharks sometimes consume members of their own species, so cannibalism cannot be ruled out. But fossil evidence rarely gives us the complete event. It gives us traces, a mark, a break, a position in sediment. Then researchers have to ask which explanation best fits what remains. The same caution applies to fossils of megalodon prey. Ancient whale bones have been found with large bite marks, matching the size and shape expected from megalodon teeth. In some cases, tooth fragments have remained embedded in fossil bones. This is unusually direct evidence. It connects predator and prey across millions of years. But even then, a bite mark does not always tell us whether the shark actively hunted an animal or fed on it after death. Modern large sharks do both. A large predator will hunt, but it may also take advantage of an available carcass. Megalodon was probably no different. Its place at the top of ancient marine food webs did not mean that every meal required a dramatic pursuit. Animals tend to conserve energy when possible. An enormous shark with an enormous energy requirement would have had good reason not to waste opportunities. So the fossil record does not show us a movie of Megalodon's life. It shows us individual frames scattered across millions of years. The remarkable thing is how much scientists have learned from those frames. From a tooth, they estimate size. From chemical signals, they investigate diet. From concentrations of juvenile teeth, they identify possible nursery grounds. From damaged whale bones, they reconstruct feeding behavior. From the ages of geological formations, they follow the species through time. And from the disappearance of young fossils after a certain point, they estimate when the species itself disappeared. A tooth may appear simple, but in paleontology, a tooth can become a clock, a ruler, a map, and a record of an ecosystem. The question people most often ask about Megalodon is probably the simplest one. How big was it? And strangely, it is also one of the hardest questions to answer with complete confidence. There is no complete skeleton. There is no preserved adult body. There is no photograph. So scientists must estimate. For many years, commonly cited estimates placed very large megalodons at around 15 to 18 meters in length. That is roughly 50 to 60 feet. Even at the lower end of that range, Megalodon would have been an extraordinary animal. A modern great white shark can reach impressive dimensions, but a large megalodon was far beyond the size of most living predatory sharks. Its body mass may have reached many tens of tons. Yet estimates have changed repeatedly over the history of megalodon research. In the early 20th century, one reconstruction of its jaws led to a body estimate of nearly 30 meters. That reconstruction later proved to have exaggerated the proportions of the jaw. Other methods produced smaller estimates. Researchers tried comparing tooth height with body length in living sharks. They tried root width. They compared different tooth positions. They examined vertebral dimensions. Each method depended on assumptions about what kind of living shark offered the best comparison. And that brought researchers back to the same problem. What was Megalodon actually shaped like? If you estimate the length of an extinct shark using a modern shark with different body proportions, the result can change dramatically. Recent research has continued to revise the picture. A study published in 2025 involving numerous fossil shark specialists proposed that the largest individuals may have reached around 24 meters, or roughly 80 feet. That would make the upper estimate considerably larger than the traditional 15 to 18 meter range. The same work suggested that an extremely large individual might have weighed around 90 tons. But it is important to hear the word estimate. These numbers do not mean that every megalodon was 24 meters long. They do not mean that 24 meters is a perfectly established maximum that can never change. Most individuals would have been smaller. And different scientific methods continue to produce different answers. This is normal. Science does not become weaker when estimates are revised. It becomes more precise. A useful way to think about megalodon size is therefore to avoid one single number. Instead, imagine a species containing animals of different ages and different sizes, as every living species does. Young megalodons began life already large by shark standards. Earlier estimates suggested newborns around 2 meters long. More recent reconstruction methods have proposed that they may have been substantially larger, perhaps approaching 4 meters in some cases. Again, the uncertainty is important. As they matured, females appear to have become larger on average than males, a pattern found in many living sharks. Some Smithsonian estimates have placed females roughly in the range of 13 to 17 meters and males around 10 to 14 meters, while newer approaches continue to reconsider the upper limits. A mature female moving through warm coastal water would therefore have been an immense animal, even without using the most extreme estimates. The head alone could have been several meters long. The pectoral fins would have needed to provide stability and lift for a very heavy body. The tail had to move enough water to drive that body forward. The jaws had to open wide enough to engage large marine mammals. And yet, enormous size creates challenges. The larger an animal becomes, the more energy it requires. Moving through water demands energy. Maintaining body functions demands energy. Growth demands energy. Reproduction demands energy. For an active predator, all of this energy ultimately comes from prey. A very large megalodon could not live by eating tiny meals occasionally. It required productive seas filled with enough large animals to sustain it. This relationship between body size and food supply would eventually become very important in the story of its extinction. But during much of the Miocene, the oceans offered an extraordinary diversity of marine mammals. Many kinds of whales were smaller than the giant baleen whales familiar to us today. There were seals, sea cows, dolphins, fish, turtles, and other sharks. For an adaptable large predator, these seas provided opportunities. Megalodon became one of the dominant hunters of this world. Its enormous size may also have offered advantages beyond simply overpowering prey. Large bodies can travel efficiently over long distances. They can store energy. They face fewer predators once fully grown. Some studies suggest Megalodon may have been able to maintain parts of its body at temperatures above the surrounding water, as some living lamniform sharks do. If so, this could have supported active swimming and expanded the range of environments it could use. But it would also have increased its energetic needs. Being enormous is both an advantage and a burden. When an ecosystem is rich and stable enough, size can be extraordinarily successful. When conditions change, the same size can become difficult to support. For millions of years, the balance worked. Megalodon grew, Megalodon reproduced, Megalodon spread across the oceans, and the fossil teeth of large adults accumulated across the world. The animal's size became its most famous characteristic long after its extinction. But size alone does not explain how it lived. To understand that, we have to look at the ocean around it. The Miocene world was filled with marine mammals undergoing rapid evolutionary change. Whales had already existed for millions of years, but their diversity was expanding. Different forms occupied different ecological roles. Some filtered small organisms from the water, others caught fish. Large predatory toothed whales shared the seas with sharks. Seals and other marine mammals moved between coastlines and open water. Sea turtles traveled through warm seas. And amid this abundance, Megalodon occupied an extremely high position in the food web. Chemical studies of fossil teeth support the idea that megatooth sharks fed at very high trophic levels. In simpler terms, they were predators of predators. Their diet appears to have included whales, dolphins, seals, sea cows, turtles, large fish, and other sharks. The exact diet would have varied with age, location, opportunity, and the size of the individual. A young megalodon in shallow coastal water would not have hunted exactly the same prey as a huge adult moving through offshore waters. As it grew, the range of animals it could tackle would have expanded. For adults, marine mammals offered a valuable source of energy. Fossil whale bones preserve some of the best evidence for this relationship. Scratches and cuts match the size and shape of megalodon teeth. Some bones show deep marks. Some preserve broken tooth fragments. From such evidence, researchers have tried to reconstruct how Megalodon approached large prey. One possibility is that it targeted important areas around the chest of smaller whales. A sufficiently powerful bite could damage ribs and vital organs, quickly limiting the prey's ability to continue swimming. Researchers have also suggested that Megalodon may have rammed or struck smaller prey before biting. These ideas are based on fossil damage and comparisons with the behavior of living sharks. We cannot know every detail. No one watched it happen. But we can say with confidence that the combination of very large jaws, heavy serrated teeth, strong muscles, and an enormous body made Megalodon capable of feeding on animals that few other predators could challenge. Estimates of its bite force are equally extraordinary. Biomechanical models have suggested forces well above 100,000 newtons, with some estimates reaching roughly 180,000 newtons. The exact figure depends on the reconstruction. Whatever the precise number, the conclusion is the same. The jaws were exceptionally powerful. Yet it may help to forget the dramatic image of an open mouth for a moment. Most of a shark's life is not spent biting. Most of it is spent swimming, searching, migrating, responding to currents and temperature, finding areas where prey are abundant, avoiding unnecessary energy use. Perhaps a huge adult spent long periods traveling between productive regions. Perhaps it followed seasonal movements of marine mammals. Perhaps it moved from coastal habitats into open water and back again. Models of Megalodon locomotion have suggested that it was capable of traveling long distances and may have been an efficient transoceanic predator. The precise speed remains uncertain because body shape estimates continue to change. But a species distributed across so much of the globe clearly possessed the ability to use large marine areas. Its fossils occur far apart. From North and South America to Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and nearby regions, evidence of Megalodon appears across ancient marine deposits. That global range did not mean every part of the ocean was equally suitable. The species appears to have favored warmer waters. Adults could move offshore, while young animals seem to have depended more strongly on coastal environments. This distinction between adult and juvenile habitat is important. It suggests that Megalodon did not simply wander everywhere without pattern. Like modern sharks, it probably used particular environments at particular stages of life. Some places were better for feeding. Some were better for giving birth. Some were safer for young animals. Some may have served as travel corridors. This is one reason the formation of the Isthmus of Panama matters to the Megalodon story. During much of the species' existence, the geography of Central America was different. Connections between the Pacific and Atlantic regions allowed water and marine organisms to move through areas that later became separated. As the Isthmus of Panama developed, ocean circulation changed. Marine ecosystems on either side became increasingly distinct. Currents shifted, nutrients shifted, temperature patterns changed. For a wide-ranging predator, such changes could reshape familiar habitats and prey distributions. Not overnight, not in a sudden disaster, but gradually. Generation and that gradual nature is important when thinking about extinction. Megalodon probably did not disappear because of one spectacular event. There was no single final day when all megalodons vanished together. Populations declined, habitats changed, food webs reorganized. Other predators expanded, nursery environments were altered. And over time, fewer individuals survived. An animal that had once been a powerful presence across the oceans became rarer, then rarer still, until eventually there were none. But before we reach that final part of the story, there is another side of megalodon life that deserves attention. Not the giant adult predator, the young. Every enormous megalodon began as a much smaller animal. Smaller, of course, is a relative word. Even a newborn megalodon may have been as long as, or longer than, many adult sharks alive today. Researchers have found concentrations of smaller megalodon teeth in locations that appear to have been shallow coastal habitats during the Miocene and Pliocene. These sites have been interpreted as nursery areas. Possible megalodon nurseries have been identified in places including Panama, Florida, Maryland, the Canary Islands, and other regions. The idea is familiar from living sharks. Many modern shark species give birth or spend their earliest stages in protected coastal habitats. Shallow bays and estuaries can provide abundant small prey. They can also reduce exposure to some large predators found farther offshore. Young sharks remain in these relatively protected areas until they are large enough to move into more dangerous environments. Megalodon appears to have followed a similar strategy. Imagine a warm, shallow coastal sea millions of years ago. The water is not empty. Small fish move through it. Other sharks are present. Marine mammals pass through deeper channels. The young megalodon is already large, but it is not yet the dominant animal it may one day become. It has to feed, it has to grow, and it has to avoid becoming prey itself. National Geographic notes that young megalodons may occasionally have been eaten by other large sharks. This should not be surprising. In marine ecosystems, size provides safety only after an animal has grown large enough. A young apex predator is not yet an apex predator. The nursery, therefore, gives it time. Each year of growth expands its options. Its teeth become larger. Its body becomes heavier. Its swimming range increases. It can pursue larger prey. Eventually, it leaves the nursery environment and becomes part of the broader marine food web. The existence of these nurseries also tells us something important about the vulnerability of the species. A giant adult may survive changes that a newborn cannot. Adult megalodons could move long distances. Young animals depended on particular shallow habitats. If sea level fell, those habitats could shrink. If coastal water cooled, conditions could become less suitable. If local food webs changed, young animals could face shortages at the stage when steady growth was essential. An extinction can therefore begin not with adults suddenly dying, but with fewer young surviving into adulthood. Generation after generation, the population becomes harder to replace. Scientists have also used megalodon vertebrae to investigate growth. Shark vertebrae can preserve bands related to growth, somewhat like annual patterns studied in other animals. Because good megalodon vertebral fossils are rare, the available evidence is limited. Still, researchers have suggested that the species may have lived for many decades, perhaps approaching a century in some estimates. A long-lived animal that matures slowly can be successful when conditions remain favorable. But long generation times may also make rapid population recovery more difficult when the environment changes. Modern conservation biology offers many examples of large sharks with slow reproductive rates being more vulnerable to population decline than smaller, faster reproducing species. We should be careful not to assume Megalodon followed every modern pattern exactly. But the basic biological principle is relevant. Large animals require time and energy. They cannot simply replace an entire population in a few seasons. One unusual idea concerning megalodon reproduction comes from research into its enormous size at birth. Some lamniform sharks develop inside the mother in a way that includes embryos consuming unfertilized eggs. This behavior, known as oophagy, provides developing young with additional nutrition before birth. Researchers have proposed that Megalodon may have used a similar reproductive strategy. If so, this could help explain why its young entered the world already so large. Again, the evidence is indirect. We do not have a fossilized pregnant megalodon showing the complete process. The hypothesis comes from its relationship to other lamniform sharks, estimates of neonatal size, and what we know about reproduction in living species. It is a reminder of how paleontology often works. Some facts are preserved directly. Others are reconstructed by combining fossils with biology. The result is not fantasy, but neither is every detail equally certain. For a sleep story about prehistory, perhaps that distinction can itself be relaxing. We do not need to force the ancient ocean into perfect clarity. We can allow parts of it to remain slightly distant. A warm bay, shallow sunlight, schools of fish, young sharks moving through water that covered land now dry. Their exact movements are gone, but the teeth they left behind tell us they were there. As young megalodons moved out of coastal nurseries and grew toward adulthood, they entered an ocean populated by other powerful predators. Megalodon was extraordinary, but it was not alone. During parts of its long existence, large predatory whales occupied some of the same ecosystems. One of the most famous was Leviathan, a giant raptorial sperm whale known from fossils in Peru and elsewhere. Other large-toothed whales also hunted substantial marine prey. Different shark species competed for fish and marine mammals. Later, ancestors or early forms of great white sharks expanded into oceans where megalodons still lived. The ancient sea, in other words, was not organized around one unbeatable ruler. It was an ecosystem. Every predator depended upon energy moving upward from smaller organisms. Microscopic life supported small animals. Small animals supported fish. Fish and other marine organisms supported larger predators. Whales depended on productive seas. Sharks depended on prey. Changes at the base of the system could eventually reach the top. For much of its history, Megalodon was apparently very successful within this system. A species does not remain widespread for millions of years by being poorly adapted. Its body, behavior, and reproductive strategy worked. Its prey was abundant enough. Its nursery habitats existed. Its temperature range overlapped with large regions of productive ocean. And its competitors did not prevent it from maintaining populations around the world. But ecosystems never remain completely still. During the Pliocene, global climate continued to change. The Earth entered a cooler phase. Ocean temperatures declined. Ice expanded at high latitudes. Sea level changed. Ocean circulation reorganized. The distribution of marine mammals shifted. And the world that had supported Megalodon for millions of years began becoming less favorable. Cooling alone is often presented as the explanation for its extinction. The real picture appears to be more complicated. A large, warm water predator could be affected by cooling in several ways at the same time. First, suitable habitat could shrink. If Megalodon preferred warm and temperate waters, cooling seas would reduce the regions where it could function most efficiently. Second, prey species could move. Whales capable of entering colder waters could follow productive feeding grounds toward higher latitudes. If Megalodon was less able to follow them, the shark would lose access to important food. Third, falling sea levels could reduce shallow nursery environments. Coastal habitats are especially sensitive to changes in sea level. A protected bay that supports young sharks can disappear or become dramatically altered when coastlines shift. Fourth, the diversity of marine mammals changed. Some of the smaller whales that had been important components of Miocene ecosystems declined. Later baleen whales increasingly included very large migratory forms. A predator adapted to one prey community may struggle as that community reorganizes. And finally, competition may have increased. Great white sharks were smaller than Megalodon, but smaller size can be an advantage when food becomes limited. A smaller predator requires less energy. It may reproduce more quickly. It can survive on prey that would not provide enough energy for an enormous animal. Studies comparing chemical signatures preserved in fossil teeth suggest that great white sharks and Megalodon may have overlapped in parts of their diets. That does not prove that great whites single-handedly drove Megalodon to extinction. It does suggest that both predators sometimes depended on similar resources. When resources are abundant, overlap may not matter very much. When resources decline, it can. Megalodon was therefore facing not one problem, but several interacting pressures. A cooling ocean, changing currents, changing coastlines, changing prey, changing competitors, changing nursery habitat, and an enormous body that required a large and dependable supply of energy. This is why many researchers favor a combination of factors rather than one simple cause. Extinction often works this way. A species may survive one challenge, it may survive another. But when several changes occur together, resilience can be overwhelmed. Megalodon had survived environmental changes before. Its lineage stretched back far beyond the species itself. Megatooth sharks had existed for tens of millions of years. Yet no lineage lasts forever. By roughly 3.6 million years ago, the most reliable fossil evidence for Megalodon disappears. Older estimates had often placed its extinction closer to 2.6 million years ago, around the end of the Pliocene. But later reassessment of the fossil record pushed the likely disappearance back to approximately 3.6 million years ago. This difference may sound small when discussing millions of years. It is not. 1 million years is an enormous period of time. The revision illustrates how carefully scientists must examine fossils that seem unusually young. A tooth can be moved from an older geological layer into a younger one by erosion. A fossil found in young sediment is not automatically a young fossil. Researchers must examine the context. When questionable specimens are excluded, the evidence points toward an earlier extinction. So somewhere around 3.6 million years ago, the long story of living Megalodon appears to end. Not in the deepest trench, not hidden beyond human reach, but in the fossil record. The teeth become older. Then there are no reliable younger ones. The world continues. The oceans change. Whales continue evolving. Great white sharks spread. Other predators occupy ecological space once used by Megalodon. And millions of years later, a very different animal appears. Human beings. The fact that humans and Megalodon never lived at the same time has not prevented the shark from becoming part of modern imagination. Perhaps that is inevitable. We are fascinated by enormous animals. Blue whales, dinosaurs, giant squid, mammoths. Anything that stretches the limits of familiar size seems to invite another question. What would it be like to see one? With Megalodon, popular culture has often taken one more step. What if it were still alive? Movies and fictional stories sometimes imagine surviving megalodons hidden in unexplored parts of the ocean. The deep sea is particularly attractive for such stories, because much of it remains difficult to observe directly. There are real animals in the deep ocean that science has only recently described. New species continue to be discovered. So it can sound reasonable at first to say that perhaps an enormous prehistoric shark has simply avoided detection. But the evidence does not support that idea. Paleontologists are confident that Megalodon is extinct. The reason is not merely that nobody has photographed one. A living population of enormous predators would leave many kinds of evidence. First, it would leave teeth. Sharks shed teeth throughout their lives. A surviving population of megalodons would continue producing large, fresh teeth. Researchers find ancient megalodon teeth in enormous numbers. They do not find modern ones. Second, A living megalodon population would require food. An animal weighing tens of tons cannot remain hidden in a tiny, isolated pocket with no significant food source. Large predators need large ecosystems. Megalodon fed heavily on marine mammals and other substantial prey. Those animals are observed. Whales are photographed, tracked, studied, and sometimes found dead. A population of giant sharks regularly feeding on large whales would leave unmistakable evidence on living and recently deceased animals. Third, the habitat does not fit the deep trench idea very well. Megalodon fossils and ecological evidence indicate an animal associated largely with warmer waters, coastal regions, and productive surface ocean ecosystems. Whales and dolphins must surface to breathe. A predator specializing in such animals gains little by living permanently in the cold, food-poor darkness of the deepest ocean. The Mariana Trench may be enormous and mysterious, but it is not a magical storage place where any extinct marine animal could survive unnoticed. Deep water is cold. Pressure is immense. Large marine mammal prey is not concentrated on the bottom. An active, warm water predator would be poorly suited to such a refuge. And fourth, size makes invisibility harder, not easier. The ocean is vast, but humans monitor it in many ways. Ships cross it. Fishing fleets operate across it. Satellites observe surface activity. Scientists tag and track whales. Divers explore coastlines. Submersibles examine deeper environments. Sonar surveys occur. Large animals occasionally wash ashore. A breeding population of sharks larger than buses would be extremely difficult to conceal indefinitely. This does not make the real megalodon less interesting. In fact, perhaps the opposite is true. There is no need to imagine that it secretly survived. Its actual story is more remarkable. A genuine giant shark evolved. It inhabited oceans around the world. It fed at one of the highest levels of marine ecosystems. It produced young in coastal nurseries. It survived through millions of years of environmental change. And then, like almost every species that has ever existed, it eventually disappeared. Extinction is not an exception in the history of life. It is part of the history of life. Species appear, they adapt, they spread. Their environments change. Some populations divide into new species, others decline. Some survive dramatic transitions, others do not. Megalodon happens to leave behind unusually impressive evidence of this process. A 7-inch tooth feels almost impossible when held beside a modern shark tooth. But it is real. The animal that grew it was real. That is enough. There is another question hidden beneath the fascination with Megalodon. What did it actually look like? For decades, illustrations gave a very simple answer. A great white shark, only much larger. Gray above, pale below. Broad-bodied, a pointed snout. The familiar silhouette enlarged to gigantic proportions. That image became so common that it can be difficult to imagine anything else. But science has become less certain. Because Megalodon is now understood to belong to a different evolutionary lineage, there is no reason to assume that every detail of its body matched the great white. And because a complete skeleton has never been discovered, direct evidence for its full proportions remains limited. Researchers have therefore tried a variety of approaches. They compare living lamniform sharks. They examine partial vertebral columns. They study the relationship between vertebral size and body length. They reconstruct the amount of body needed in front of and behind the preserved spine. They model swimming efficiency. They ask, what shape would allow an animal of such enormous mass to move effectively through water? Some recent research suggests that Megalodon may have been more elongated and slender than the traditional oversized great white reconstruction. Comparisons have sometimes been made with the proportions of sharks, such as the lemon shark, although this should not be interpreted as saying that Megalodon simply looked like a gigantic lemon shark either. The point is that a longer, less bulky body may have been mechanically more plausible for an animal reaching extreme lengths. Researchers have also proposed relatively long pectoral fins. These fins would have helped support and control a massive body moving through water. The head may have been proportionally different from that of a great white. The snout may have been shorter, the jaws broad and powerful. But many details remain open to revision. Color is even more uncertain. Soft tissue usually does not fossilize. Skin patterns do not survive in the ordinary Megalodon fossil record. So, when an artist paints one gray, blue-gray, brownish, or dark above and pale below, much of that is reconstruction rather than direct evidence. Countershading would be biologically plausible for a large marine predator, but we cannot point to preserved Megalodon skin and confirm its exact pattern. This is worth remembering whenever we look at an extinct animal. A museum model can feel authoritative because it is three-dimensional and life-sized. But it is still a scientific interpretation. At the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, for example, visitors can encounter a life-sized Megalodon model measuring about 52 feet. It offers a powerful sense of scale. But the model does not mean every anatomical detail is known. The same applies to reconstructed jaws. Museum jaws are often displayed wide open, so visitors can see the teeth. A living shark would not necessarily have opened its mouth to exactly the exaggerated position used in a display. The exhibit is designed to reveal structure. It is not a frozen photograph of the animal in life. Perhaps there is something enjoyable about keeping this distinction in mind. You can look at the giant model and appreciate it. Then imagine that the real animal may have been slightly longer, or slightly slimmer, or carried its fins differently. The model gives us a doorway. The fossils tell us how far we can confidently walk through it. Beyond that point lies uncertainty. And uncertainty is not emptiness. It is simply space where future evidence may change the picture. And Megalodon was not the first giant shark. Its evolutionary story began long before the species itself appeared. Sharks have existed for hundreds of millions of years. Their lineage reaches back to a world before dinosaurs, before mammals, and even before the first forests looked anything like those of today. Over this immense span of time, sharks evolved into many forms. Some were small, some large. Some occupied coastal habitats. Others lived in open oceans or deeper water. Some evolutionary branches disappeared completely. Others survived and eventually produced modern groups. The lineage leading toward Megalodon included a series of increasingly large predatory sharks, often referred to as megatooth sharks. One important earlier form was Otodus obliquus, which lived tens of millions of years before Megalodon and was already a large predator. The deeper evolutionary history may extend still farther back through earlier lamniform sharks. Across this lineage, teeth changed gradually, side increased, serrations developed. The animals became increasingly adapted to feeding on large prey. This was happening while marine mammal ecosystems were also changing. Evolution does not take place in isolation. Predators and prey influence one another. As whales diversified, they created new sources of food for large predators. As predators became more capable, prey faced new pressures. Ocean temperatures changed. Continents moved. The environment repeatedly reshaped what kinds of bodies and behaviors were successful. Megalodon represented one extraordinary result of this long evolutionary process. It was the final member of the megatooth lineage. That phrase, final member, can sound almost lonely. But evolution does not plan lineages with beginnings and endings in mind. There was no sense among living megalodons that they represented the last stage of something. Each animal simply lived in its own present. It responded to hunger, temperature, other animals, and the conditions of its environment. The idea of a lineage exists only when we look backward. From our perspective, we can arrange fossil teeth through time. We can compare their shapes. We can observe changes. We can see earlier relatives and later descendants or close forms. And eventually, we see the line stop. After Megalodon, there was no later giant otodontid carrying the lineage into the modern sea. Other sharks continued. Great whites continued. Mako sharks continued. Whale sharks survived in a completely different ecological role as enormous filter feeders. But the megatooth predators were gone. Their absence changed marine ecosystems. When a large apex predator disappears, ecological opportunities can open for other animals. Florida Museum researchers note that as Megalodon declined, other predatory whales and smaller sharks occupied parts of the food web. This does not mean a single animal simply replaced Megalodon in one neat step. Ecosystems are too complicated for that. Instead, relationships reorganized. Prey faced different predators. Competitors changed. Energy moved through the food web along different paths. The ocean after Megalodon was not empty. It was different. And over the millions of years that followed, it gradually became the oceanic world more familiar to us. Baleen whales evolved enormous body sizes. Modern marine mammal groups spread. Great white sharks became important predators in many temperate seas. Killer whales evolved into extraordinarily flexible hunters, occupying a wide range of marine environments. Eventually, human beings reached coastlines. Much later, humans built ships capable of crossing oceans. Then came scientific expeditions, museums, fossil collections, deep-sea vehicles, genetic studies, computer models, and eventually, researchers found themselves using modern technology to reconstruct a shark that had vanished millions of years before any of those things existed. There is a strange symmetry in that. Megalodon left almost nothing intentionally. Of course, it did not know it was leaving a record. A tooth fell from its jaw. Sediment covered it. Millions of years passed. Then a human picked it up and asked a question. How large was the animal that carried this? One question became many. When did it live? Where? What did it eat? How fast did it grow? Did males and females differ in size? Where were its nurseries? Why did it disappear? What living sharks are most useful for comparison? And gradually, an ancient predator became a scientific story. Perhaps one of the easiest ways to appreciate the age of Megalodon is to think about the places where its fossils are found today. A tooth can be discovered in Florida, another in North Carolina, another near the Chesapeake Bay, others in Panama, Peru, Morocco, Australia, Japan, Europe. Today, these are separate landscapes with their own climates, coastlines, cities, roads, and human histories. But the rocks remember older geography. A fossil tooth found inland may have fallen from a shark into seawater. The sea floor received it. Sediment buried it. The environment changed. Sea level shifted. Tectonic forces altered the land. Erosion exposed the ancient deposit. A river cut through it. And then, after millions of years, the tooth appeared again. This is why Megalodon is also a story about geological time. Human history is usually measured in years, decades, centuries, and occasionally millennia. Geology asks us to think differently. 1,000,000 years becomes a useful unit. The Miocene began roughly 23 million years ago. The Pliocene followed millions of years later. During those spans, species evolved and vanished. Mountain ranges changed. Ocean passages opened and closed. Climate patterns shifted. And Megalodon existed through a substantial portion of this changing world. If an individual Megalodon lived perhaps several decades, then thousands upon thousands of generations could fit inside the species' entire existence. No single animal experienced the whole story. One generation encountered one ocean. Another, millions of years later, encountered a somewhat different one. Changes that seem enormous when viewed from the fossil record may have been almost invisible within a single lifetime. An ocean cools slowly. A coastline moves. A prey species becomes slightly less common. Another predator becomes slightly more common. A nursery bay is reduced. Migration routes shift. Each generation experiences only part of the transition. This is one reason extinction can be difficult to imagine. We tend to picture a final event. But for many species, there may be no dramatic final event at all. There may only be a long trend. Fewer suitable places. Fewer successful young. More competition. Greater energy demands. Smaller populations separated from one another. Then, eventually, the last population disappears. We do not know where the final Megalodon lived. We do not know whether the last individuals were large adults in open water or members of a small, isolated population. We do not know the exact year. The fossil record cannot usually offer that level of precision. What it can tell us is that reliable fossils are found up to a certain period and not after it. From that pattern, researchers estimate that Megalodon disappeared around 3.6 million years ago. The species that had once spread across so much of the world was gone. But its fossils were only beginning their much longer second journey. They waited beneath the seafloor. Some were carried into rock, some remained offshore, some eventually emerged into sunlight. And, after humans appeared, those fossils began shaping stories again. At first, stories about tungstones. Later, stories about giant sharks. Then, scientific papers, museum reconstructions, commentaries, movies. And now, perhaps, a quiet story playing beside someone who is slowly falling asleep. The modern fascination with Megalodon often emphasizes extremes. The biggest shark, the biggest teeth, the strongest bite, the largest predator. These comparisons are understandable. Numbers help us picture an animal we cannot see. But if we focus only on the extremes, we can miss something more interesting. Megalodon was an animal adapted to a particular world. Its success depended on relationships, temperature, prey, coastlines, nurseries, competitors, ocean currents. Its enormous size was not separate from the ecosystem. The ecosystem made that size possible. When the ecosystem changed, the cost of maintaining that size may have increased. This is a useful lesson from natural history. No species is powerful in isolation. Even an apex predator depends on organisms far below it in the food web. Whales depend on productive oceans. Those oceans depend on nutrients. Nutrients depend on currents, chemistry, climate, and countless biological processes. Megalodon stood near the top of this immense network. But being at the top does not mean being independent of everything underneath. Quite the opposite. The higher a predator sits, the more layers of life ultimately support it. A decline far below can eventually reach the very top. The fossil record of the Pliocene shows major changes in marine ecosystems around the period in which Megalodon disappeared. Large marine animals experienced extinctions. Ocean conditions changed. The closing of the Central American Seaway altered circulation between the Pacific and Atlantic. Cooling affected the distribution of species. New ecological relationships emerged. Megalodon could survive only if enough of the system continued to support it. Eventually, apparently, it did not. That makes the animal no less successful. A species surviving for millions of years has already achieved something difficult to comprehend on a human timescale. Megalodon was not an evolutionary failure because it became extinct. Almost every species that has ever existed is extinct. The modern world is only one moment in the much longer history of life. The animals around us today are not permanent residents of Earth. They too exist within changing ecosystems. The fossil record reminds us of that quietly. A shark tooth lying inside rock is a small object, but it can represent an entire vanished ocean. And now, as the story moves toward its end, we can return to the tooth. Imagine one Megalodon, somewhere in a warm sea millions of years ago. We do not know whether it is male or female. We do not know its exact length. Perhaps it is a mature animal, perhaps not yet fully grown. It moves through the water. One tooth loosens. This is ordinary. Another tooth waits behind it. Eventually, the old tooth falls. The shark continues swimming. It does not notice the moment as anything important. The tooth sinks, down through sunlit water, past small fish toward the seafloor. It settles into sediment. Time continues. The shark lives out its life. Other megalodons are born. Others disappear. General follows generation. Thousands of years pass. Then millions. The species itself eventually vanishes. The tooth remains. Sediments harden around it. The sea changes. Perhaps the land rises. Perhaps erosion eventually releases it. One day, long after humans have appeared, someone finds the tooth. They lift it from sand or rock. They brush away sediment. And they realize they are holding part of an animal that no human ever saw alive. That is the connection fossils give us. Not a connection through memory, not through written history, but through matter. The same tooth that once sat inside the jaw of an ancient shark can rest inside a modern museum. The time between those two moments is almost impossible to imagine. And yet, the object crossed it. Today, scientists continue studying Megalodon. New fossils can alter estimates. New analytical methods can change reconstructions. Questions about body shape remain open. Max length remains debated. Entities of physiology remain under study. The exact balance of causes behind extinction remains uncertain. This means the story is not finished in the scientific sense. The animal is extinct. But research continues. Perhaps new vertebral material will be discovered. Perhaps a better preserved specimen will reveal more of the skull. Perhaps chemical analysis will refine our understanding of migration or diet. Perhaps new models will produce another estimate of body proportions. This is how knowledge grows. Not by holding one image forever, but by changing the image when better evidence appears. The Megalodon, once imagined as a giant great white, has already become something more complicated. An ododontid shark, a member of a long extinct lineage, possibly more elongated than earlier reconstructions suggested. A predator whose size varied by age and sex. A species using coastal nurseries. A wide-ranging hunter feeding on marine mammals and other large animals. A shark adapted to warm and productive seas. And eventually, a species unable to survive the full combination of changes transforming those seas. Its story stretches across millions of years. Yet almost all of that story has been reconstructed from objects small enough to place on a table. Teeth, vertebrae, bones marked by bites, pieces of an ancient ecosystem. Something today. There is no living monster hidden beneath us. No giant shark waiting in an unexplored trench. The real Megalodon belongs to a much older ocean. And perhaps that is where it is most interesting. In warm Miocene seas, along ancient coastlines, across channels that no longer exist, near nursery bays now turned into rock, following marine mammals through waters whose currents have long since changed. For millions of years, the shark was simply part of nature, not a legend, not a movie creature, not a mystery designed for us to solve, just an animal. An extraordinarily large one, certainly, an exceptionally powerful predator, but still an animal shaped by the same basic forces that shape all life: food, environment, competition, reproduction, change, and time. Eventually, the oceans moved on without it, but some of its teeth remained, and through them, a little of that vanished world remained too. If your thoughts have wandered while listening, that is perfectly fine. You did not need to remember every date. You did not need to remember every measurement. Perhaps all that remains is the image of an ancient ocean, a wide horizon, warm water, a coastline unlike any coastline on a modern map, and somewhere beneath the surface, a giant shark moving quietly through its own world. That world is gone now. The continents have shifted, the currents have changed, the animals have changed. Millions of years have passed, and the sea continues moving, just as it did then. Wave after wave, current after current, one age flowing slowly into another. And with that, the story of Megalodon becomes quiet again.